Hi there, this is December 9th, and this is one of my favorite stories. It's called Why the Chimes Rang. See if I can get you a picture here. Why the Chimes Rang. There was once in a faraway country where few people have ever traveled a wonderful church. It stood on a high hill in the midst of a great city, and every Sunday, as well as on sacred days like Christmas, thousands of people climbed the hill to its great archways. The building itself had stone columns and dark passages, and a main room so long one could scarcely see from one end to the other. In the farthest corner was an organ, so clear and loud that it could be heard for miles around. Altogether, no such church as this was ever seen before, especially when it was lighted up for some festival and crowded with people. But the strangest thing about the whole building was the wonderful bells. At one corner of the church was a great gray tower that rose so far into the sky that it was only in very fair weather that anyone could see the top. All the people knew that at the top of the tower were the Christmas bells. They had hung there since the church had been built and had the most beautiful sound in the world. Some thought it was because a great musician had cast them and arranged them. Others said it was because of the great height, which reached up where the air was clearest and purest. However that might be, everyone who had ever heard them thought they sounded like angels far up in the sky. But the fact was that no one had heard them for years and years. They were Christmas chimes, you see, and were not meant to be played by men or on common days. It was the custom on Christmas Eve for all the people to bring to the church their offerings to the Christ child. And when the greatest and best offering was laid on the altar, there used to come pealing through the music of the choir the Christmas chimes far up in the tower. Some said the wind rang them, and others said that they were so high the angels set them swinging. But for many years they have never been heard. It was said that people had been growing less careful of their gifts for their Christ child, and that no offering was brought that was great enough to deserve the music of the chimes. And so every Christmas the rich people still crowded the altar, each one trying to give a better gift than the other without giving anything that he wanted for himself. And the church was crowded with those who thought perhaps the wonderful bells might be heard again. But although the service was splendid and the offerings plenty, only the roar of the wind could be heard far up in the stone tower. And so now, a number of miles from the city, in a little country village where only glimpses of the tower could be seen in fair weather, there lived a boy named Pedro and his little brother. They knew very little about the Christmas chimes, but had heard of the Christmas service. Between them, they formed a secret plan to go see the beautiful celebration. "Nobody can guess, little brother," Pedro would say, "all the fine things there are to see and hear. And I have even heard it said that the Christ child sometimes comes down to bless the service. What if we see him?" The day before Christmas was bitterly cold, with a few lonely snowflakes flying in the air and a hard white crust on the ground. Pedro and little brother were able to slip quietly away early in the afternoon, and although walking was hard in the frosty air, before nightfall they had trudged so far hand in hand that they saw the lights of the big city just ahead of them. Indeed, they were about to enter one of the great gates leading to the city when they saw a dark shape in the snow near their path, and they stepped aside to look at it. It was a poor woman who had fallen just outside the city, too sick and tired to even seek shelter. She would soon be so sound asleep in the wintry air that no one would ever be able to waken her again. All this Pedro saw in a moment, and he knelt down beside her and tried to rouse her. Turning her face toward him, he rubbed some snow on it, and when he had looked at her silently a moment, he stood up again and said, "It's no use, little brother. You'll have to go alone." "Alone?" cried little brother. "And you not see the Christmas festival?" "No," said Pedro, with a bit of choking sound in his throat. "See this poor woman? Her face looks like the Madonna in the chapel window, and she will freeze to death if nobody cares for her. Everyone has gone to the church now, but when you come back you can bring someone to help her. I will rub her to keep her from freezing, and perhaps get her to eat the bun that is left in my pocket." "But I cannot bear to leave you and go alone," said little brother. "We both need not miss the service," said Pedro, "so you go. You can easily find your way to the church, and you must see everything twice, little brother, once for you and once for me. I'm sure the Christ child will know how I would love to come with you and worship him. And, oh, if you get a chance, little brother, to slip up to the altar without getting in anyone's way, take this little silver piece of mine and lay it down for my offering when no one is looking. Do not forget where you've left me, and forgive me for not going with you." In this way, he hurried little brother off to the city and blinked hard to keep back the tears as he heard the crunching footsteps sounding farther and farther away in the twilight. The great church was wonderful that night. Everyone said it had never looked so beautiful. When the organ played and the thousands of people sang, the walls shook with sound, and little Pedro, away outside the city wall, felt the earth tremble beneath him. At the close of the service came a procession with offerings to be laid on the altar. Rich men and great men proudly presented gifts of jewels and gold. Last of all walked the king of the country, hoping with all the rest to win for himself the chime of the Christmas bells. There went a great murmur through the crowd as the king took from his head the royal crown, all set with precious stones, and placed it gleaming on the altar. "Surely," everyone said, "we shall hear the bells now, for nothing like this has ever happened before." But still, only the cold wind was heard in the tower. Then the people shook their heads and said they never really believed the story of the chimes and doubted that they had ever rung at all. The procession was over, and the choir began the closing hymn. And suddenly the organist stopped playing, and the old minister held up his hand for silence. As all the people strained to listen, there came softly, distinctly, swinging through the air, the sound of the chimes in the tower. So far away and yet so clear, the music seemed so much sweeter than any sound they'd heard before, that the people sat transfixed, and then they all stood up together, and they stared straight at the altar to see what great gift had awakened the long silent bells. But all that the nearest of them saw was the childish figure of little brother. He had crept softly down the aisle when no one was looking, and had laid Pedro's little piece of silver on the altar. I really like that story. Okay, see you tomorrow.